Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and glad you could join us for episode 4. And tonight we're going to connect all the way to Sydney, Australia, to talk to Paul Cassar. Paul models the Riverbelt line, and he's got a bunch of other irons in the fire here. So going to roll right into it and get chatting with Paul. Paul, welcome to Around the Layout.
It's good to be here, and congratulations on this podcast, because I listened to the first one and really enjoyed a podcast that's focused on layouts and focused on modeling. And, I walk every morning, so it's great to have these podcasts to listen to.
Well, glad we can contribute to your walking entertainment, and I certainly want to thank you for all the support you've given us early on with the show. That's definitely helped us get the word out and connect to model railroaders like you. And when we started chatting, it was clear that we wanted to get you on the show as well, because I think you've got a great story to tell between not only your layout, but also the group that you manage on Facebook, which has exploded. And I'd love to get, we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about some other things as well that you've gotten yourself into with your layout. But let's first start kind of towards the beginning of things. What got you into the hobby? And then, sure. Kind of where you've progressed from there.
So I think, as a child, my father had bought my brother a HO scale. It was called Triang in those days, but now Hornby. And I had a layout when I was in my teens on an 8x4 HO. And then as I went to finish school and I started work, girls and cars, the hobby went by its side. And then after being married, I was working with a colleague who was a real big N scaler and still is. So this is back in the mid-90s, which got me back in the hobby, and I started modelling N scale Union Pacific. Had quite a large layout in a room downstairs in the house. It was all continuous running. It was a double dog bone, and had a couple of yards, but not really for operating. I was running long trains, but I soon found that a bit replicating and boring, so I sort of fell away from that, and then we decided to move house to a new place, and I decided to sell, and it was time to get into HO. My eyesight wasn't like it used to be, so I sold my whole N-scale collection, and it was the selling of that collection that enabled me to fund my HO scale layout. And I guess over the time, I was administrator of Train Board, which is one of the forums. I've been there for 20 odd years. And that gave me my interest, and I saw how other layouts were being produced. And I met a person who went by, I don't know his real name, but he went by MC Fujiwara, who was used to do professional layout designs. And I had him design me a switching layout for the garage, which is 18 feet by 18 feet, with a lift-up bridge where the door access. But when I bought the house, it was a display home, and it was still a display home for 2 years until I could move into it. So I had access to the house, and I was able to measure up and measure the garage and design the layout before I even moved in the house. So it was all ready to go.
So you had a lot of pre-planning time there as you were anxiously awaiting to get into your home.
Yes, exactly right. So I was able to look at what style of bench work and the type of things. But for me, it was the fact that HO was now DCC, was easy to go to DCC and sound. So because I sold my whole N-scale collection, I could start afresh. So every locomotive I purchased was DCC and sound, and that's added such a dimension.
Oh, absolutely!
To the layout.
Absolutely brings a new level of realism to it when you go away from that silent stuff and you get into digital command control. And I remember personally doing that, and imagine the step up. And we'll talk a little bit about you. So you went from N scale to HO scale. And imagine, the difference that you were starting to see from going to those two scales,
and the availability of rolling stock and locomotives. Like N's come a long way, certainly, and but when you get a HO, the availability of just buying online, it's all there, which is in one way good, but not good for the wallet.
Yeah.
And I made a pact with myself I wouldn't have more than 10 locomotives. Well, I think that lasted the first 12 months.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to ask. So let's ask. I've been poking around, and I looked at your Riverbelt line, and that's what the one thing I noticed was like, oh, okay, so he's got some MKT locomotives, and then I was like, wow, he's got a lot. So how many locomotives do you have on your in your collection, Paul? And
interesting.
Hopefully,
if you'd asked me 3 months ago, I would have said 30. I'm down to 20. I've actually reduced my fleet only because I've got more on pre-order.
Oh.
So I've
just making room for the incoming stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I've sort of changed. I had all EMD,
okay,
and I do like Alcos.
Okay.
And the Bowser release of the RS3. So before that, the Rapido RS11s, which I purchased 3, which are beautiful units, and then the RS3s were on pre-order. So I've got 4 RS3s on pre-order, and then I've just pre-ordered the first scale trains GP30 in Norfolk Western.
Oh, excellent.
So I've got that. So I thought I sold off some of my EMD collection, mainly the non-Missouri Pacific, and so I've sold some SP and a few others, and I want to focus. So the Riverbelt line originally was Missouri Pacific interchanging and the MKT interchanging with the Riverbelt line, which were using lease units.
Okay.
I've now changed that the Riverbelt line has a contract with Norfolk Western, and Norfolk Western switches the western end of the Riverbelt line and interchanges there with the Riverbelt line and the Norfolk Western. And then at the other end of the layout, I have 2 interchanges, one with the MKT and one with Missouri Pacific. So having a point-to-point layout and a switching layout and having interchanges and opens up a whole world of modeling.
It certainly
I have
does.
I have drawers underneath the layout. I have 3 sets.
Yeah.
So when cars come into the classification yard at the Norfolk Western end, cars come off, go in the drawer, and cars come on. Depends on what's done by my switch list. At the other end, I have drawers for the MKT and the Mopac. So cars and locomotives come off and come on. So always a variety of cars on the layout, which gives me the opportunity to purchase different cars, and I've sold some off. So I think in anything, even in life, anything you do, your taste changes and your interest changes. And I found that for my modelling. And eBay's been good to me. I actually enjoy selling things on eBay and then purchasing other. I don't buy off eBay. I usually buy new. I'll weather everything. Just recently, I had some too many hoppers, so I sold 12 hoppers off, and I'll buy some maybe some tangent ones or the ones from Home Shop from Chris Palomares.
Yep. Yes.
I've ordered a couple from him, some nice quality cars.
Absolutely.
But, there's so many things you can do. But having anyone looking at designing a layout, seriously consider having some interchange. Absolutely. And interchanging off the layout, because it adds a whole new perspective.
Well, one thing you've hit on, and I'll go back to it a little bit, is your ability to, with the layout that you have. So you're modeling prototypical railroads, but in a very much a freelance way.
Yes.
So what you've been able to do, and I certainly love backstories to layouts, right? Where you can create that story. It isn't just, hey, here's the railroad and here's what it is. You've kind of created this thing where the one railroad's leasing power from the other, and therefore it justifies it. So you can build your justification story right in your freelance railroad, although you have a prototypical rail.
Exactly. And because I work on a prototype. I've been a signal engineer, and I've been in railway signalling for 43 years. I've walked many miles of track, doing maintenance in my early days. I know what the ballast profiles are like for different type of lines. So I replicate that in the model. I know what the infrastructure looks like out there. So I was keen to have it looking very realistic in relation to what the infrastructure is like. But then I've got the ability to run whatever I want. To a point. I've sort of tightening that up a little bit, but it has to look realistic. So no locomotive or car really runs on the layout unless it's weathered. And I'm a bit of a lazy weatherer. I don't pull the airbrush out, although I have one. I tend to use pan pastels.
Yep.
And I use acrylic washes now as well. So I'll do the initial with a pan pastel and then use acrylic wash. And if you want to learn about weathering, Boomer's Diorama, the YouTube channel, that guy's I'd probably rate him as the absolute number one person in modelling. And I've learned about using acrylic washes watching his YouTube channel.
Yeah, we'll definitely get the link from you, and then we'll share that in the show notes so that people can check that out. Because another thing noticeable, hopefully we'll also share the link to your Facebook page for the Riverbelt line.
Yeah,
and where people can see this, and noticeable right away is that exactly that. Not only is the power weathered, but your rolling stock is all nice and weathered, and it looks really good. I mean, you've done an excellent job of building that in. But I want to go back to I want to go back to this bench work, because we'll get kind of in the beginning. You talked about moving into your new home, and you had all this time to plan. I want you to talk about this, how you actually put your bench work together, because it's really a great, unique piece, to at least to what I've seen, where you can get some bench work built very quickly and have some really strong stuff and really build off of that. So if you would, please tell us that story.
Yeah, I did a bit of research and looking at people's bench work, and I got the idea of using commercial available shelving that you can purchase and assemble yourself. So it's steel. The base is steel. So there's, think about if you go to any shop or you go to any hardware store, you can buy that self-standing shelving. It stands about 6 feet high. So I ran that all the way along the two walls, and then I built a timber bench work sat on top,
right?
Which is using like 2x4 pine. And by doing that, I have the strength of the steel bench work, and then I have the timber to build the layout on. And what I did was I cut the front of the steel bench work away, so it's still held at the back, but I cut the front at the layout height, which is at 50 inches, so that you've got an open view. So then the top section is still there, which I built the valance, and then the bottom section, of course, I have the what am I looking? Fascia. Right. So it gives you that theatre type of look with LED lighting inside the valance to light the whole layout, and then of course, because they're shelving, everything below the layout is all for storage. So all my tools.
Yeah, that was like one of the first things I really was like, wow, he's already got, almost instant. You've got the bench work there. I mean, about the time it takes you to go to any home center, hardware center in our area, it'd be like a Home Depot or Lowe's. I'm not sure what it'd be in the, in that side.
We have Bunnings.
There you go, Bunnings. So you go there, you get that loaded in a vehicle, you get home and you assemble it. I mean, you've got instant bench work. You're not trying to cut it and everything. It's right there.
And there was a little bit of cutting to take out the front struts.
Sure.
But other than that, it was pretty much assembled in a few days. And then the timber work, I think within about 2 or 3 weeks of moving in the house, the bench work was in and completed. Although there was 2 stages. I originally, and I think that's the other part. So what I believe, if you ask me about building a layout, is you don't want to get bogged down. It becomes overwhelming. So what I did, I built the first wall first, the first 18 feet. I built that, installed the track, wired it, and did the scenery before I did the part over the other side of the door. I think it's important that you get some benefit up front. Otherwise, you build these layouts and they never get completed.
Right. So, yeah. You gotta have some kind of, not necessarily maybe on the smaller end of instant gratification, but at least something to keep you inspired as you're going.
For sure. And the other point is, being a signal guy, I know what it's like to have signaling systems, but mine has no signaling systems. So it's all fully manually operated. All the switches have Caboose Hobby throw-over levers. I do have a couple of road crossings that have flashing lights at this stage. I may motorise the booms, but all the switches are manually operated. And for me, I get it. I know those people out there who have got CTC systems and dispatching boards and all the like. Well, I play with that for real, so it didn't interest me to do that in the modelling side of things. For me, it's about switching, operating, and reliable operations, and not a lot of maintenance. So I operate the layout twice a week at least, sometimes more than that. And I find the more you operate, you very rarely have to clean the track.
Absolutely.
It stays fairly well.
Yeah. So what are you doing for operations? Do you have a group that you're operating with, or is it kind of your own thing? Or
bit of a lone wolf.
Okay. Yeah.
Although I do have a few work colleagues who are into modelling who'll come out and not so much model, but operate, but see what I'm doing. I've met a few people through my group, which we'll talk about, that live not too far. Now that COVID's hopefully on the back end,
let's hope.
Probably look at having them out and to operate. But for me, and I will say this, that during COVID, and we had significant lockdowns here in Sydney, modelling, the investment I've invested in this hobby over the years paid for itself in the 2 years that we were in lockdown. For my mental health, I'd work in the office, do some long hours, and then just to relax, I'd go out in the garage and I'd operate for an hour. And purchasing things online and that type of stuff and waiting for them to arrive, and then doing weathering, all that in those 2 years, the layout's paid for itself.
Yeah, there's
no doubt about it.
There's something definitely to be said about the hobby, and it's a multitude of different hobbies, but more focused on ours, of that ability in the last 2 years. It's kind of all we really, for at least a short period of time here in the United States, it was kind of that same thing. We went into that lockdown period that was, supposed to be 15 days and certainly lasted more like 15 weeks, but it was one of the things to get you through. And you could go down there in that 187th scale world that didn't have COVID at all, and it had no worries in the world, and you could just escape into it. Definitely is a big help for the mental health.
It was, and but even now, I'm in a quite high pressure role now, and it's good just to get out from the computer and go out. Even sometimes at lunchtime, I go out there and potter around and operate a locomotive, and then of course the weathering is great to relax, and the research, and of course the social side of things as well. I've made some great friends through the hobby, and certainly online. I've got some good friends that I chat to regularly, and then of course the group that I manage keeps me pretty busy as well. But the layout itself, I think, for me, it's a reflection of myself. And I'm quite proud of it. To a point where, if you're in the railway industry or railroad industry, it used to be you never used to tell people you're into model trains because you were seen as being a bit, another guy who loves trains.
Right.
But during the lockdown, I actually we did an hour and a half session with our team, and I gave them a layout tour. So I had 45 people online while I operated the layout and showed people what model railroading was all about.
Oh, that's wild to be able to bring that many people in and get them, show them what your hobby is and being related to it.
It was great. It was great.
Absolutely. But going back to your layout, I mean, so you've got this as an operational layout. What are some of your favorite parts of what you've created as far as like industries and whatnot? What are some of the more enjoyable spots? Like if you were to go down right now, what would be like your choice place to operate on your layout?
So there's Coors Brewery. The brewery has a distribution spur, a receiving spur, and it also has a tanker because my brewery takes corn syrup and uses that as part of the process. And then it has beer tankers that it loads beer in to distribute. So it's quite busy. Probably holds it'll probably hold about 15, 20 cars all up in the three spurs, and it's complicated switching because it's end to end. You have to run around as well, so it has 2 runarounds, so that keeps you busy. And the way I've set up the layout, it has three different switches that switch the layout that come from different interchanges. So you've got the Norfolk Western, you have a locomotive that mainly switches box cars on the layout. And then I have one that's the MKT, that interchange from the MKT, and it switches mainly tank cars and gondolas, because I have a scrap metal industry as well. And then the third train switches all the grain I have 2 silos on the layout, and I have a little port that exports grain. So I'm able to cover a lot of different types of cars, and each train I have set up switches round about 25 cars per session, and each train would take about an hour and a half to switch. So a full session for me is just one train, but a full round is 3 trains. So there's 4 or 5 hours, which I will do that in maybe a week or 2, depends on how much time I get. But the layout's always in operating mode. So I just need to walk in there, pick up my iPad with the switch list, and continue switching.
I've had some conversations with some folks about what you have there, and what I would consider a relatively smaller layout. And then we've got others that they've built these massive model railroad empires, and they're beautiful, and but for a lot of people that's not necessarily obtainable. And I think what you've done here is you've proven out, with the time that it takes you to switch all this, and correct me if I think you said 18 by 18, correct, for a bench work, and 2 feet deep, and you got a little bit more depth on your yard, but it doesn't take a whole lot to keep somebody busy on a layout.
Oh no, and the challenge is that sometimes you'll get a train with a number of cars longer than the runaround.
Right.
So then you've got to determine, what are you going to do? How are you actually going to switch? What's the most efficient way? And do I need to drop some cars off in the spur and switch some, and then come back to the spur? So it keeps you active. It keeps your mind, thinking, how's the most efficient way for me to switch this, to keep it interesting. So you've got your layouts, and a good friend of mine and yours, Don Iris, has this magnificent, double deck layout. But in a way, it's a switching layout in a way, because it's around the walls, got a helix, but it's based around operations.
Absolutely.
So to me, that's a layout that one day I will get to see. I'll go over there and operate. That's to me is an absolute, how you can do something in a 20 by 12. It's not a significant size layout, but what he's got would satisfy everybody's needs for an operating layout. I wanted busy, and I wanted lots of switching capability, hence why the design of the layout is what it is, with a couple of runarounds, two yards, and 3 interchanges. So that's enough. And as I said, I'll go an hour and a half switching just one train.
Right. So that it just goes to prove that whole thing out, that for anybody that's listening to this that's looking to get into the hobby, and it's beautiful. You flip through any of the publications, Railroad Model Craftsman lands here every month, and I'm always looking through there, and there's some really large and beautiful layouts, but there's also some great small layouts, and I think and yours ranks right up there as your ability to not only focus on and finish too. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Now with all the time that you're not building more bench work or trying to do all this, now you can really drill in on details. And it was always the case that you do scenic. My case was a scenic, the whole layout, but that's just baseline. And then go back and super detail areas. Like last weekend, I took a structure and put roof details on it. Yeah, that was your cores building, correct? Yeah. So you never complete a layout, but now it's at the point where I'm detailing scenes, putting more detail in. Mini prints, I put in one of those flickering drums of fire. Yep. Last week. So little Lionel string from AML, of course. I've got one of those. I've purchased quite a bit from Mini Prints. Bernard does some great work, and
for me, it is a detail. People go and look at scenes and see something. Even I see things that I hadn't realised I've done. So not having a real large layout gives you the ability to do that, to spend the time and even, how many people weather buildings, but, buildings weather.
Yeah.
So I've weathered all my buildings, and also I weather all my cars and rolling stock as I go as well. And that's intimidating. You pay up to $400 for a locomotive, then to weather it.
Very intimidating. Yes.
Yeah, it is. So usually I will operate it a few times before I weather, but
Sure.
I must, if you're a bit worried about weathering, you can start with an older locomotive.
Right.
But what I've found is, even if you just mask up the glass on a locomotive and spray it with dull coat, don't even do anything else, that alone will age the locomotive.
Yeah, it definitely takes that new shine off of it, gets it weathered down just a touch, and then now you've got your foundation for weathering by doing that.
Absolutely. So all my locomotives are weathered. My last one I did was my Rapido SW1200, and I weathered that lightly and hit it with dull coat, and it just looks magic. And people comment about that. I've got 3 Rapido RS11s, and one of them was a Norfolk Western that I actually blacked out the Norfolk Western, so it looked like it's been patched out.
Right.
And then weathered it heavily, and then dull coated it, and it's one of my favourite locomotives. It just looks fantastic, and I just think that weathering locomotives and rolling stock just adds another dimension to your hobby. For one, rainy day, grab some cars, and I use pan pastels. I get my iPad out and I'll Google a car similar or the same car if you can, and practice doing it.
Absolutely.
The other way is I use watercolors. I just use washes, and if everybody who knows me knows that I'm a fan of Boomer's Diorama, which is a YouTube channel, and he's a professional modeler. But what I've learned from him in relation to how to paint, how to weather, he's incredible. So I certainly recommend everyone to have a look at his YouTube channel.
Yeah, and I'll definitely get the link from you, and we'll share that in the show notes as well, along with some of the other things that we've discussed, and your the Facebook page for your Riverbelt line, so people can see these, so they can see this work that you've done. When it comes to weathering, do you find yourself, you've talked about a couple different methods, you pan pastels and then airbrushing and whatnot.
Yep.
Do you find that you try to alternate it to try to get different looks?
I say to people, the biggest challenge about weathering is about being inconsistent.
Right.
Because if you're consistent, they all look the same, and no car should look the same.
Yeah.
So I try and use pan pastels, or some I will use washes. Some I'll use pan pastels and washes. Some I'll use a bit of paint to mark up markings and things like that. Some I'll mask up the number boards and then weather the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So it's about trying to get an imbalance rather than a balance of cars weathered. But I can see some that say, I did those the same, and then others I'll see different. So, I think there's an art. Like locomotives, I tend to only do pan pastels and weather them lightly, although some I've gone fairly heavy and then sealed them. And, people talk about rolling stock not being investment. I don't really think. I think, once you weather them, you're probably not going to sell them.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to sell them at a profit, put it that way.
No.
But for me, it's about realism, and the layout has to be realistic.
And one thing weathering can do also is it kind of levels the playing field between, say, an operator version of a rolling stock to some of the high end stuff. And there's some beautiful high end stuff out there. And boy, my wallet cries every time I look at it. But you can also get for, maybe a third of the price, some of this operator stuff. And if you can put a little more detail and just weather it, it's going to blend in with the rest of your railroad fairly well.
Yeah. Look, I've got Atlas, and then I've got Athengenesis and Rapido. And, once they're weathered, it's hard to tell. Actually, I bought a Cardo Burlington Northern GP35 from a guy 20 years ago, before I was even in HO.
Right.
He sold it to me cheap, and I pulled it out last year, and I stripped it down, and I painted the Norfolk Western and put DCC and sound in it, and it's one of my best locos. Those Cardo models just run forever.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful loco, and you wouldn't know the difference between that and something I've probably paid 3 or 4 times the price for.
Yeah.
Once you weather them. And it's interesting if you watch a lot of YouTube channels of modelers or layouts, and I start to look at mine and compare, and I think, geez, they haven't weathered. Why haven't they weathered any of the cars? It just, to me, it just doesn't look right. You need, and you don't have to weather all cars. And I've had that discussion with a few people, because cars are released all the time, brand new, and the prototype, although I don't think they last clean very long.
Right.
The only thing I will say that I don't do, and maybe I'm showing my age, is I don't graffiti.
That's a debate amongst a lot of modelers, right? To graffiti or not to graffiti. And
yeah,
I still haven't made that decision yet. So
I know a few modelers who graffiti, and there's one guy, Kyle, who's in our group, who is openly admitted that he used to do it to trains when he was a kid. Now he does it on model trains, and the stuff looks incredible.
Sure.
And they do look good, but it's your own hobby, and if you want to do it, fantastic. And even on our group, there's people who put up graffiti cars. I have no problem with that. It's all part of the hobby. I just personally choose not to, although I have asked Kyle to paint a car up for me, so I may have 1 or 2 graffitied as a talking point on the layout in the future.
I think probably if I make that decision, it's going to be maybe something that's I enjoy, and you were talking about that super detailing. I enjoy what I call the Easter eggs on layouts, where you look
right.
and find something, or maybe it's a nod to a friend, or and I've got a few of those on mine. And I think if I'm going to go graffiti and go that route, it'll probably be a nod to a friend kind of thing, and certainly not maybe some of the more colorful things that can be put into graffiti.
No, and the other point is, I've seen locomotives graffiti, and I think, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to a locomotive. But as I say, each to their own. That's fine.
Oh, it's amazing, and you see some of these other folks online that the GE toasters where they've done the burn and everything else. It's wild. It's like, but that getting over that initial fear and then knowing what the result is, even if you're doing simple weathering, and that hesitation. It's real. It exists. That do I dive into this? But don't like you said, don't start with your best locomotive, or don't even start with your best car, or find a $10 kit somewhere and play around with that.
Yeah, and that's what I did too. And you soon get the art of it. And I'm no artist, that's for sure, but it's just grab a photo of a car and have a go. Use pan pastels. If you're not happy with it, you can wash it off.
Right.
And you just practice, and even if you can just use pan pastels on the trucks and just weather the trucks first. Don't even worry about the body. Mm-hmm. That even adds a new aspect.
Absolutely. I will warn anybody who hasn't started to weather with pan pastels, or even weather in general. It's addicting, because once you start going on it, then and you start to get some good results, and you're starting to see what the difference is. It's going to be hard to stop. At least I found it for myself.
Yep, I totally agree.
So let's before we get too far away from your operations, one of the things that we talked about is how you do your ops, and you do these switch lists. And I found the picture, and we'll definitely share them. I'm going to get some of these photos and share them on a Facebook post when the show releases, because not only are you operating using switch lists, but your switch lists look very authentic. And I want to talk about that in the process of creating that and what you've done.
So I stumbled across a program called Switchlist, and it's a Mac only, unfortunately. It was developed by Rob Baldich is his name. He was an Apple programmer and a modeler, and he developed and built this Switchlist program. And it's free. It's free from the Apple Mac Store to download, and it's quite simple. I mean, you still have to learn it, but it's nothing like the JMRI operating switch list. You build your industries, you put your cars in, You put in the lengths of your spurs, and then you develop the switch list. And for me, it's been incredible. It's such a great. It has 3 trains, so I built the 3 trains. It knows what cars to switch, and it can load in a day. So each session's a day, but you can set cars to load in 3 days. So some of my cars unload in 1 day, some unload in 3. So you're not setting and picking the same cars up at each spur every time. So that means that the next day you're switching a spur. There's a car you'll have to move out to bring a car in and then put that other car back. So that adds to the complexity. The other thing about the switch list is each door of the industry is a different spot. So where I have the brewery, on the receiving spur, it has 8 doors, and the cars are switched to different doors and picked up from different doors. So you can imagine just one spur can take 15, 20 minutes just to switch it and 3 or 4 cars. So it's you make it as complex as you want, and you're always changing the switch list to balance. So for me, it was balancing how many cars are on the layout and how many are in the drawers.
Right.
If you get it wrong, you might have too many in the drawers, not many on the layout.
Sure.
Or vice versa. And just by altering your switch list and how many cars per week go to the spur, because you can make them weekly, daily, or monthly.
Sure.
In the switch list, it keeps that random around the switch list rather than having a fixed pattern. And it's a great program. And I've also got a Facebook page for that switch list, which is called Switch List Operating Group. Oh, so any newcomers who want to have a go at setting up the program, we have a number of experts who are better than me, who are always there to give advice on how to set up their switch list. And I think it takes, for me, I know Don, for instance, uses a Excel spreadsheet, but it takes some time to do your next operating session. With the switch list, once you've switched all the cars, you hit one icon and says next session, and it automatically generates your next switch list. Now you can print that out. What I do, I save them as a PDF, and I send them to my iPad, and I just have the switch list on my iPad to switch my train.
Excellent.
You can also use your laptop as a server, and you can connect your iPad directly to the switch list program and modify the switch list as you go. So, and I get it. A lot of people say they take a while to set up and complicated. This one's not. Once you learn about it, I don't know if you know, is it Joe DeLucia from Crossing podcast?
Okay. Yep.
He has joined, and he uses switch list as well. Yep. The switch list.
So I can't speak on behalf of Don, but I think maybe the Mac part might be hanging him up more than anything.
It is at the moment. I'm pushing him to get a Mac.
Yeah, so
that he can use it. Right. And that is, I've spoken to Rob, who's a developer, and he's quite happy to hand over the data for it. If someone wants to take it on and convert it to Windows-based, or even make an app, he's quite happy to. It's all open source as far as he's concerned. So
for me, one of the things I noticed right away about your switch list, and I'm a Finish guy, and you certainly done that with your layout as well. But when it comes to those little details, and literally the switch list that you've shared, the only thing missing are the tearaway dots for the pin printer, right? It's it looks like something that you would go into an office and it would spit out on an Okadata printer or similar. Yep. And I just love that look because it makes it so realistic to the prototype.
And there's a number of templates it comes with, and you can modify the templates as well.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So, as well. So it's a great program, and that's probably another dimension. So we're talking about different dimensions of modeling, and certainly in operating, having a switch list or cards. Although to be honest, I've never understood way bills and cards. For me, I just like the switch list because it basically says where you're picking the car up, where you're setting it off, and you get a number of cars to do, and then you've got to do what they do in the prototype and work out, how do I build my train? Which cars am I going to drop off first? Which ones are facing? Which ones are going to have to run around to drop off and pick up? So it still leaves it to yourself on how you actually switch the train.
Now, do you find you're running or creating a switch list every time you operate? Am I right in saying that?
That's correct. So I print 3 because I run 3 trains.
Yeah.
So I print all 3, have them ready to go, and then I'll switch usually to Norfolk Western first. And it's interesting, even how you. So originally, when I was switching with it, I'd leave any cars that are coming off layout onto the interchange. I would leave that until I'd switched all the cars on the layout. But I've changed that now, that I load, after I finish switching one train, I load the interchanges up with the cars for the next session, which means that when I've picked up cars from the industry to drop off on the interchange, I actually have to switch the interchange out first to drop cars off into the interchange. So it adds more complexity into the operation.
Absolutely.
And it changes. It makes you think even differently, because now the assumption is at the beginning of every session overnight, those interchange lines have switched the interchange and dropped off cars for you to start the next day with those cars.
Yeah, and I like that. So your interchange is really going from a draw back onto in and then back out again.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
And even the classification yard has a draw. So my classification yard on the West Belt has three sidings. I use the number 3 for grain only, number 2 for box cars, and number 1 is really the departure road out of the classification, because cars come on and off the classification yard as well. So as I get more cars, as the roads fill, they come off the layout, go in the draw as well. And then when they're called again by the switch list to come out of the classification yard, then they're brought back on the layout. So otherwise, so I guess that gives me the excuse to have as many cars as I want.
Well, I think that's it too, right? It's so hard, especially I'm in a similar situation with a smaller switching layout, and it's like
you can't have the yard space. You can't have enough space. So all you need is just an interchange, and then the cars come off. And Alex Bogaski, isn't it? He's farmyard layout. It's a small shelf layout, yet it gives so much enjoyment.
Right.
You only need 3 roads and a 2 feet of line, and you're switching.
Right.
Yeah, enough room for a locomotive and 1 car, and you can operate anywhere.
Good friend of mine, Joe Mammy, talks about that ability to have that. It doesn't take much. One turnout can turn yourself into a switching layout, and the ability to have that instant on too, where you're not worried about a whole lot of things. There's just so much. There's so much ease of entry into our hobby, and I think that's one of the things that does make it great. Is,
and I would recommend anyone who's starting in the hobby is to build a switch layout first, because you learn all aspects of it before you go build that dream layout. Learn on something smaller, and you may even find that you start questioning why you want to build something so much larger as well.
All those skill sets can be built within that. If you decide to do 6-8 feet, all those skill sets will be tried within that area. You can still do scenery. You can still lay track. You're obviously going to lay track. You can do buildings on it. You can do so many different things all within that.
Exactly right. And as you gain experience on that, then you take that next level of experience to your next layout. And that was a learning experience for me as well. And what I've learned so much, even building this and doing scenery and weathering, you go back and do another layer because you've gained that experience and you're that much more proficient on that part of the hobby.
Yeah. I'll ask you this question because it's one that I've kind of thrown around to other people and get your take on it. Does the hobby ever end? Like we build these layouts, and then you build all these skill sets as you're going.
Yep.
You become proficient at doing scenery, and then you do all this, and then all of a sudden your layouts quote unquote done.
Finished.
Yeah. So how does that next step handle? I mean, I'm a ways away from it, but how do you go to that next thing?
I think as I said before, your tasting things change as well, the dry things. So for me, I like the thought of maybe scratch building some structures, whereas all my structures are all Walters or the like, although they're all been modified to fit and make backdrops out of. I'd like to have a go at some prototypical. So when I retire in maybe 5 years' time, I have another wall in the house that I may build a prototypical switching layout based on Sydney, New South Wales trains, because I won't be working then.
Yep.
And that would be totally hand laying track. I'm not sure if I'd give that a go, but certainly I would look at prototypical buildings and taking photos and have a go at styrene and building some buildings. I'm doing a bit of that now, some modifications, and I've put fencing in and those type of details. I think it's the hobby never ends and the layout's never finished. Mm-hmm. Would I dismantle this one and build another? That I'm not sure. I do know that modeling's in my blood, and we discussed selling from here and maybe moving in an apartment. And the discussion was, well, there has to be a third bedroom for the layout. But we've gone past that and decided, you know what, let's stay where we are.
There you go. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I could demolish the layout, and if I did, I'd look at what I'd build, but it'd be another switching layout. I think a point-to-point layout with the ability to continuous run is probably ideal.
Right.
But having said that, I don't miss the continuous running. I'm quite happy just to run a locomotive from one end to the other and switch. I think that's just, and I guess that brings me on to the proto throttle.
Yeah, let's get into it because I know you've been anxious to tell us about your proto throttle experience. So for those that don't know, let's talk about what is a proto throttle.
So proto throttle's made by Iowa Scaled Engineering. It's the closest you'll come to ever operating a locomotive to the prototype. So the actual throttle itself is designed around an EMD control panel. It has the horn lever. It has 8 notches on the lever on the throttle, and it has an individual braking lever, and it has option. It has a button for the bell and a few other buttons. But it's a step. It's an advanced step in operating. If you're an operator and you want to really experience what it's like to operate, then the proto throttle is the only way to go. But it comes with a steep learning curve. So I'll talk about my experience.
Sure.
So the proto throttle requires different CV settings, configuration settings on your values on your DCC decoders. The way the throttle works is it relies on the locomotive being set up to operate, so that when you accelerate, it accelerates at a let's say a slower rate, and when you deaccelerate, the locomotive will continue to operate. So it still coasts along, and then you must apply the brake lever to actually bring the locomotive to a stand. Now, consider on a normal throttle where it's really just a knob that you apply power, and then when you turn it down, the locomotive stops. Well, not with the proto throttle. It's actually truly operating. You actually have to apply braking to that train for the train to come to a stand. Now that sounds fantastic, and it is, but to get to that is a learning curve. So before the proto throttle, I was okay to be able to set CVs using my NCE power cab.
Yep.
I can change CVs. Basic, I would say. I have basic knowledge. Well, for the proto throttle, you need to be able to change functions as well in some locomotives. So you need to use JMRI Decoder Pro, which is what I need. So I needed to set that up with my laptop and work out how to change CV settings using Decoder Pro, which is a learning curve in itself. And then the proto throttle itself has its own configuration settings. So you can program 20 locomotives into it. not just the locomotive number, but how you want the speed to be applied.
Yep.
What function. So what the other thing I learned was different. Even though we have a NMRA standard on decoders, manufacturers actually use the functions differently, and the CVs aren't all the same. Right. So, for instance, Lock Sound uses function F4 for their braking, and Tsunami uses function F10.
Okay.
So each locomotive has to be set in the protothrottle for the different functions that locomotive has. So it can be overwhelming, although and the problem is because even, let's say Athearn, for instance, will use a Tsunami 2. The Tsunami 2 settings on a GP38-2 may be different to that on a GP40, or they may be the same.
Oh boy!
And all manufacturers are the same. They're not 100%. Rapido does different functions on different locomotives, so you have to understand that and understand how to remap some of those functions to use on the protothrottle. But the basic CVs for the protothrottle, I can tell you off my head. CV3 is 125, CV4 is 255. CV4 is your deacceleration. By setting it at 255, when you turn the throttle to 0, it's going to continue to coast for 5, 6, 8 feet.
Right.
Significant weight. So, and then if you're on throttle 8, and then you drop it back to 0, it's going to go to the end of your layout unless you can apply the brakes.
Sure.
But getting over that curve, and there is Facebook page, a group for protothrottle, and there's also a Google forum for it. The level of operating it gives you is next to none. I mean, when you operate with a protothrottle, it adds. So I used to be able to switch a train in an hour. Now it takes me minimum hour and a half, closer to 2 hours, because the protothrottle slows everything down.
Right.
Because you're accelerating more prototypically, you're deaccelerating prototypically, you're applying brakes, you've got time to use the horn. It really makes it more realistic. It also has a brake test function on it, so you can actually simulate testing the brakes on the train, the air continuity on the braking system.
Wow.
And I haven't even fully opened up the protothrottle to its full functionality, right? But just when I had a few people come over and I showed them, and they just blew them away. Oh, yeah. Just couldn't believe the how realistic it is. And when you operate, so you can also, if you've applied the brakes and you don't remove the brake, and you throttle up to 8, that locomotive is sitting there under full throttle sound. Yep. And not moving, and then as you let off the brake, the train will start to depart. The other part it has in it is what I call vigilance control. It's called alert on the protothrottle. Yep. So you can set it that if you've got a train operating and you don't touch a lever for 30 seconds, the protothrottle will start to flash at you, and you can set the locomotive bell to ring or the horn to alert. So it's as if, hey, there's no one on the controls here and I'm moving, you need to do something.
Oh, so it's built-in alerter right on the throttle. And wild.
If you don't operate the horn or the throttle or the reverser, it will bring the train to a stand itself. Oh. It'll apply emergency brakes.
Wild.
So I do say to people, if you're in operations, protothrottle is the way to go. I mean, they're not, as they say even on their site, protothrottle will cost you with the card similar to 2 locomotives.
Sure.
Right?
But it completely changes the way, it seems like it completely changes your layout in sense.
Completely, it's wireless.
Yep.
It's compatible with most DCC systems. It's plug and play. And it's more about learning yourself on what CVs. And after I've learned so much, I can tell someone quite easily with 3 basic CV changes on their locomotive, and they'll be operating basically with the protothrottle. Yeah, the lighting mightn't be working independently and things like that, but you'll be able to accelerate, deaccelerate, and apply the brake as it's designed. And that's just being able to apply brake apply the braking. If you're operating, you want to throttle up to maybe 2 or 3. If you throttle past that and then you back off and then apply the brake, it's going to take a lot longer to stop.
Sure.
So when you're switching, you've got to make sure you throttle up to maybe 2, and then coast into a spur, and then apply the brake without slamming the car.
So yeah, let's talk about that. There's had to been a learning curve, right?
Oh yeah, it's been a real learning curve. And, a couple of times I've had to grab the loco.
Sure,
because I'm going too fast. But absolutely now I can have a train with 15 cars on it operating with the proto throttle, and it's just a pleasure to operate. It really, you not feel like you're playing trains, you're operating prototypical with it.
Yeah,
and
it definitely seems like the next level of operations.
And Scott Thornton and the team over at Iowa Scale Engineering are so helpful. I emailed them with some issues. Yeah, my issues, not issues with the throttle.
Yep.
And they were really helpful on what I need to do. But I do say to people, at least you need to understand about changing CVs on locomotives, and also, which anyone with DCC really should be able to do, basic understanding. But then function mapping, you really need either Dakota Pro, or if you use Locksound decoders, you can use their Locksound programmer.
Right.
But for me, the Tsunamis and the Locksound decoders have proven really quite okay to be able to adjust to operate.
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience that I have let's see, there's 3 guys in the group that have a proto throttle, and probably 2 of the 3 of them, which is Mark Herrick and Don Iris and Mike King as well in our operating group. And I'll be honest, I haven't used one, and there's a key reason for that.
Yeah,
because I know once I do, I'm going to be in some trouble gathering it.
They're a little bit bulky. They're quite a large throttle. But that adds to it to me, because it feels like, you'd be in the cab of a locomotive. So I think it's I certainly recommend it for those who are serious about operating. And
it's already become a thing where I've seen online where the customization of them, you can get different knobs, different face plates,
different face plates, and
it's
all that
wild.
type of thing. People weather them, and I haven't. I just like mine being pristine.
Right.
But it's getting plenty of use, and even the battery life on them are fantastic.
Excellent.
And it has its own card, so it doesn't work off Wi-Fi. It has its own special signal, and you can run multiple proto throttles off it.
Yeah.
So I know some have got 3 or 4 proto throttles.
Right.
I've got the one.
Yeah. So well, that's a good place to start, and it's certainly again, one thing that you did key on that, and I'll segue into this is the support that's available, and you've mentioned at least a couple, but I want to focus in on one group that you've created because it's just absolutely blown up. I want the HO Scale Shelf Modelers group, and how you kind of got that group started, because I think I looked back in like 2021, you had 165 members. Now you're 9,000 plus in that group.
Yep.
So talk a little about running that Facebook group, and what the positivity that's brought.
So we were in another group, which was a Shelf Modelers group, and it was run by one admin, and that person was having a few issues with the group, and we're going to close it down. And we'd offered to provide them some assistance, but they decided that no, it was their group and they could do what they want, which is fair enough. It's Facebook.
Sure.
So Jason Reese, who's the other administrator, approached and said, well, let's open up a new group with more than one admin, so that there's no single ownership. So he approached me, and from day one, and or I may have approached him about being admin. And we set up this group. The first day, I think we had like 15 people. And then the word started getting out at that other group that we'd started a new one. And having I admin a local community group at home. And I realised that, and I don't know if you look at HO Scale Model Railroading, it's a group of 48,000, which I'm a member of, and I think most people are. You'll find that people post, and a lot of people like, but no comments. So I have a policy that no post that gets posted on our group goes without comments. Even, I will just make a comment saying, well, thanks for posting, or, this is a really good model, or, rather than just like. And what I've found is that starts the algorithm off within Facebook.
Yes.
And it starts to post it in other modeling groups. And we started to see a flow of members come across. And we encourage people to post. We encourage people to make comments rather than like. And it's continued to grow. As you say, we'll be 12 months this month since we started. And by the end of the month, we'll probably be at 10,000 members into the group. And we've got some great modelers there, and I get a lot of inspiration from a lot of people on the group, and a lot of encouragement, and I encourage a lot of people, and so do others on the group. So we're really lucky to have some good modelers, and the fact that it's shelf modeling. Now, a lot of people are interested in shelf modeling, and I think it's probably one reason why the hobby is expanding as it is, because people are realizing now that you don't need those basements. One wall in a room is sufficient to build a really high detailed operating layout.
Right.
And of course, you only need 1 or 2 locomotives. You don't have to have 30 like me, but I'm lucky to be in a financial situation where I can.
Right.
But in theory, I only need 1 or 2 to operate the layout. And a lot of modelers are seeing that, and they're seeing some. You've got who comes to mind there? Dave Atkins from the UK, who models the US on a small shelf layout. The detail of that layout is just wonderful. I have a number of group experts in the group, and if you look at those, which I'm just looking at now, so that I can remember their names, all their names. So I've got so many, is incredible. They really know their stuff, and they're always willing to help people. And for me, I think that's really important, is what the group is about. It's about having experts, but also having beginners, and providing people encouragement on modeling.
They talk about the growth of the hobby, and it's been asked and talked about in many ways. And boy, I see like your group being a big part of what really is the hobby's always been there. It's that level of exposure that the internet has provided, right? It's always been kind of on the, but it was always kind of in a basement or in a garage in your case or whatnot, but there was no reach beyond it. And now this whole social media thing and groups like yours that really drive that positive thing have really helped expose what's out there. I remember going back. I was going to say,
and it's created friendships, lifelong friendships as well. And I chat to a number of people, and we help a lot of people out on the layouts, and just provide advice. But it's also just a good place to be.
Sure.
And we don't tolerate any issues, or I can only think of 1 or 2 times that we've had people make bad comments and they're removed. Mm-hmm. If you want people to post, they need to feel that they're comfortable to do that. They're not going to be criticised, and I think that's important. It takes a lot to post. Sure. When you're an old hand like us, it's no problem. Mm-hmm. I'm quite happy to share my work. But if you're a beginner, it can be intimidating, and we encourage people to post. That they laid their first piece of track on a shelf, even on a layout. We're not that strict that you can't do that.
Sure.
And I think that reflects the growth of the group. Now Don and I have this discussion. There's 9,000 members, but how many are really active? And that's true. You'll always get those who are really active. You get others who are just browsing and want to see the posts. But I would say we have a good 100, 150 active posters on the group. And I think last month there was something like 7,800 people active for the month.
And again, if you have, I've struggled too. I'm trying to promote a podcast. I've tried to do, and I've in all walks of life, trying to figure out that Facebook algorithm, right? How do you really get, people to react to it and respond? And sir, you've done a phenomenal job of getting that, because if you can hit some of the posts I thought, I saw, several hundred likes, which is just very wild. You think about it, it's not easy to do. People sit there and they, I know what I do. I sit with my phone and I scroll like crazy. And then, do I actually I like stuff I see, but do I take the moment to go and find that thumb and hit it? But
I think that's the challenge. And the challenge is encouraging people to comment.
Right.
So when someone posts, I will encourage, it's the old thing, open questions. You ask an open question in the post.
Sure.
And they will respond, or someone else will respond, and that starts the comments flowing. And that's what I tend to do. I'll ask, what type of locomotive? And I'm generally interested anyway.
Right.
And I'll ask the question, is that an Athern, or how did you do that? And what building's that? Did you scratch build it? And by asking those questions, it allows people to respond, and it's that type of response, I think, that the algorithm picks up and tends to become part of your feed, which is, my feed's all model train stuff, but
mine's pretty close.
And I think that's how, and by posting your podcast, even though it's not shelf related, it's still layout related, and I'm the admin anyway, so who's gonna pull me up?
Some of the things you can get away, the privilege
for
of
sure.
power.
But I'm able to then expose 9,000 people to this podcast, and as one of the challenges is we have a number of YouTube creators on the group, William Sampson and a few of the others. Sure. And William's great. He'll post now and then about his podcast, and that's fine. Some tend to want to post their YouTube channels every day, and we have to tone them down, because I understand why they do. We're a large community, but people don't like to see all that type of stuff either.
Yeah, you want to make sure that there's variety and that everybody gets an opportunity. And hence, not only that, my podcast is kind of the same way. I'm hoping to give everybody an opportunity to come and share their story with us and do that. And it's good that you, in your arena with the group, that you're allowed to do that. And then you have even posted some, kind of questions, and just try to engage that conversation. And that's been a huge help.
And I like to run a few polls and get some interest in what's going on there as well. And it's interesting. And we really get some really good feedback on that, and a lot of people participating in the polls. What brand locomotive, and what have you got on pre-order? What are you expecting? And do you use a switch list, or do you use cards? And it gives you a good insight of what's happening around the layout on the hobby.
Yeah, and that healthy debate definitely helps people. I mean, and that's what you want to do. The what's going to make the hobby even better is that connectivity and the ability for everybody to bounce ideas off each other. You can be a lone wolf operator, but you don't necessarily have to be a lone wolf. You can connect with people and get great ideas and come out from that shell and let us hear about what you're doing. So
and I consider myself a lone wolf, but my layout's probably one of the most shared on the internet at the moment. And it's about finding that balance too. Sometimes I think, should I put more photos up? I mean, so many people have seen it, and you don't want to become over popular either, I don't think. But I always try and take different shots and share different angles, and I'm my own worst critic, because it's interesting, if you really want to critique a layout, take photos of it and have a look back at it. I've found a lot of things that were wrong that I've gone back and repaired. I had someone picked that I had I've got a diner, and the sign was round the wrong way, which I'd never even realised. And someone said, "Hey, Paul, do you realise that?" So, oh, wow, So I'm always, I had a leader in my career once said to me, "Paul, all feedback is good."
Yes.
And I've held on to that. I'm happy for people to give me feedback, whether or not it's considered to be constructive or negative. It's up to the individual to determine how they take that feedback. Yeah. And for me, I always encourage people to give me feedback.
Yeah, like there's always a takeaway, right? No matter what you have, there's a takeaway in it. And you may post a picture up, and it's funny that you may have intentions of sharing a building, and instead it's not the building that they see. They see something totally different from you, and it's wild.
a classic one is I took a photo of one of my Rapido RS11s and a beautiful shot. I just thought, wow, that. Sometimes you take a photo of your own layout and go, wow, is that my layout? You know?
Yeah.
But the railings on the locomotive are dislodged and were at a wrong angle.
Oh boy.
It was leaning across, and then I spotted that and thought, oh no,
Right.
had to retake it. But it's good, yeah. And I think that's one of the I think one other thing I just about have to leave, I guess, is getting on. Yeah. But my mother encouraged me into my hobby as a child, and even up until recently. Now, my mother turned 97 last week. Oh, she would give me money to go and buy things for my layout. And when my dad passed 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they used to come out here and they used to go in the garage and look at my layout, and really enjoyed seeing it. So those memories never leave you, and that's been a really important part of my hobby. I have a granddaughter now who's 3, who now knows how to use a protothrottle, by the way.
Well, excellent.
And she's operating the horn on the train for us. So I think, I think that's a really important part. Everybody knows me for my trains, my models, my friends, family know that I love my trains. My mother still says that.
Yep.
And, I couldn't have found a better hobby. And I think everybody can learn from it, and I continue to learn and continue to make friends. I'll never be without it. I know that much.
Well, that's great. Paul, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. And I definitely look forward to having you back on. We'll talk more about your layout, because there's a lot more to talk about. And as you continue to detail it, we definitely are going to want to get updates. And great work on the Facebook group. We're going to share those links for anybody listening to join in and connect and really be able to share along with that group. So
anybody's welcome to contact me through Facebook and through the group, which is HO Scale Shelf Modelers with 1 L. I think that's a US thing, because I always think it should be 2 L's. But anyway,
I think it's also color has OUR in it, right? Is that
that's right?
That, yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. So
that's right. So get us on Facebook. Message me. I'm always happy to help. And thanks for having me on. I really, really enjoyed it, and really loving this podcast. I think it's having podcasts about model railroading is important, because it spreads the word, and I'm all for growing the business. Excellent. As well in the hobby.
Well, you certainly are doing that with your Facebook group, and I'm glad to have you here on Around the Layout. And Paul, will be talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Ray. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.